Dedicate the class to my husband's birthday today, and to my grandfather's passing, day of his passing, that we call the yahrzeit, Avram Tzvi Hirsch. Trying to remember his father's name. Mother's name is Rivka Leah. And Hoshea Ephraim. I think that was my grandmother's name. I'm spacing out right now. But my grandfather, for the day of his passing, which is the same day as my husband's birthday. All right. So let's get started. So what we're going to be talking about today, or the first thing I want to talk about, is the idea we've touched on before. And it's a little bit complicated, truly, but it's very, very, very important to understand, which is the idea of that a non-Jew is allowed to believe in what we call, in Hebrew, it's called shituf, which in English you might call God plus an intermediary. Now, this is something discussed among the sages. Is this permissible? Is this not permissible? There's not complete agreement, but the high majority opinion, which the Lubavitch Rebbe does follow, is that a non-Jew is allowed to have this belief. Now, again, to be clear, what this means is, for a Jew, it will be forbidden, it will be considered idolatry. For a non-Jew, it's sort of like, if you want to call it begrudgingly permitted, but if one did have this belief, they would by definition not be among the righteous of the Gentiles. What we call Chasidei Umos HaOlam, as we've discussed that term, that Chasidei Umos HaOlam, the righteous Gentile, has a portion in the world to come and is serving God on this highest level. That would not be for any non-Jew that believed in God plus an intermediary. But it's sort of like permission is granted. Now, again, as I said, some sages disagree and say no. And any belief in anything besides God is already idolatry and is forbidden for all mankind. But the majority of the sages say it's permitted in a very narrow way. The narrow way is there could be a belief, there could be thought, there could be speech, but it cannot be expressed in an action. It cannot be expressed in a service. So if a non-Jew had a crucified image, that would be considered idolatrous. That would be considered something with all the laws of an idolatrous image that we've discussed, or a cross, or any of those things, because that's already a tangible physical action. That's something physical in our world. That would be something that would be an act or an object of service. And that's for sure forbidden, on no level be permitted. But if there was a belief, even that's spoken about, but it's not actively worshipped, then it would be permitted. So it's a very, very fine line, because usually if people have a belief and they talk about it, they're also going to do something about it. And once you do something about it, that's forbidden, and that's idolatry. But if it's still just in the level of a belief and spoken, but there's nothing physically done, then it'd be permitted. Now, again, it couldn't be a belief of more than one God. Because if there's a belief in any God beyond one and only one God, that's idolatry. But there's the concept of the intermediary. Where do we get this idea of the intermediary as something a human's going to go toward? Is because that's actually how idolatry started. And originally, if we go back to the beginnings of idolatry, mankind, the philosophers of mankind at those years said, God is so great, God is so powerful, God is so all, everything. How can we talk to him directly? Who are we to talk to him directly? You know, he created awesome intermediaries between us and him, like the sun and the moon and the stars. These are huge luminaries. We're going to talk to them, and they're the intermediary for us to talk to God. That was actually the beginnings of idolatry. And when it first started, the first people that started this truly did not view the sun or the moon or the stars as gods. They viewed them as creations closer to God than they are. Bigger, more powerful, more connected. That was the beginning. So they really did view it as an intermediary. That was exactly literally how it started. An intermediary. It was literally viewed as an intermediary. And then there was a sort of, you could call it deterioration over time. And in this deterioration over time, people started saying, we should really praise and serve the sun, the moon, the stars, because, again, we still understand there's God, and we understand these are creations of God, but these creations help us. These creations give us sunlight, give us moonlight, whatever, we benefit from them. So even though we understand God is God, and these are only creations of God, but we're still being thankful. We're thankful to the sun for shining. So we are praising the sun for shining. Not that we think the sun is God. God is God. The sun is a creation of God. But it's shining. So, like the expression is, if a master sends you a servant with a bottle of wine, you thank the waiter, even though, it's not his wine. The wine is his boss. But he's giving you the wine, so you thank him for being so gracious and giving you the wine. You're being nice. You're being appropriate. You're being mannerly. So we should thank the sun for shining, because even though, of course, it's a servant of God and it's a creation of God, but, you've got to be thankful to the waiter for giving you the wine. And then, give it a little more time. And they said, well, you know what? The more we thank the sun for shining, the more it will shine for us. And maybe if we don't thank it so nicely for shining, it won't shine for us so well, and we won't get the sunlight we need. And maybe we need to thank the forces of rain for raining. We understand there's God, and God created the rain, but we thank the rain because you got to be polite, and we thank the rain because we want more rain. So they started giving. I'm showing you exactly how idolatry started. So the first stage of idolatry was, God's so big, we can talk to him directly. Let's talk to intermediaries that are closer to him than us. The sun and the moon and the rain and all these natural forces. Then it was, we should really praise them because we have to be thankful. I mean, they are the waiter, so to speak, and you say thank you to the waiter. And then they said, and the more I praise the sun, the more it'll shine for me. And the more I thank the rain, the more my crops will get rain. And the more I thank the moon, the more I'll have moonlight to walk in when it's night and dark and I'm walking. So they started thinking that these forces that are created by God have independent volition. That was the critical mistake. Independent volition. The more I praise the sun, the more I'll get sunlight. The more I praise rain, the more I'll get rain. The more I praise the moon, the more I'll have moonlight. They still know God's God. They still know these forces are not God, but they're thinking these forces have independent volition, which of course is a critical mistake, because they don't. Obviously they're like the axe in the hand of the wood chopper, and it's when God wants the sun shines. When God wants rain, it rains. When God wants the moon to shine for you, it shines for you. And then give it a little more time, and there was a tremendous, even worse stage when mankind started saying, sun's pretty big, and the more we thank it, the more sunlight we get. And what must have happened? God is God, and he created all these forces. They're all his creations, but he's busy, he's big, he's God. So he's probably not paying so much attention. And he left these natural forces to run the show for him. Like, you put good people in charge and you can take a vacation. If something's really big and important, he'll get involved. But like 99.9% of the time, why should he bother? So these forces really are the ones that are running our world. So we have to really praise them and really serve them, because even though God's God, but he's not the one directly interfacing with us most of the time, like 99% of the time. So we've got to really praise that sun and moon and rain and wind and earth, because that's what's really going to determine. And they were on that stage for a while. And then you fall even more and you forget that they're all creations of God. So it starts off, there's only God. And then there's a level of God's so big, let me talk through these intermediaries. And then you start thinking, I have to praise the intermediaries to thank them. And because the more I praise, the more I'll get. Critical mistake. They don't have any independent power. And then you fall even lower and think God abandoned the earth, so to speak. He's busy with bigger things. So really, I have to serve them because I really want them to be nice because God's not really involved in the nitty-gritty details. And then man fell to the space where they forgot there's a God that created the sun. They forgot there's a God that creates the rain. And they just view them as completely independent gods. So that was the progression of how mankind fell to idolatry. Till, of course, the stage, which is idolatry, which the sun's a god. But the stage of viewing the sun as running the show because God's busy is also idolatrous. And the stage of viewing, we've got to sing and dance to the sun because the more we sing and dance, the more we'll get, is also idolatrous. And the stage of saying, I can't talk to God directly because he's too big, I need to speak to the sun as my intermediary, is also idolatrous. So that was the progression, and it got worse and worse and worse and worse. And all of these stages are idolatry, though obviously in a more subtle form, until it becomes full-fledged as we envision idolatry. And again, we're saying it's a debate among the sages. Is any of this permissible for a non-Jew? And there's a minority opinion that says, nope, none of it. Just like a Jew, none of it's permissible. But the majority opinion is that belief in an intermediary is permissible as long as that belief is not translated into any action or service. Now, again, as we've discussed before, when you go to something like JC, the question is, are they viewing him as an intermediary or as also a God? Because of course, you can't have belief in another God. And if they're viewing him as a God, then obviously it's forbidden. But if they're viewing him as an intermediary and they don't do anything concrete to serve him, and they don't do any action involving him, and it would just be a belief and words, it would be permissible, but those people would not be able to be considered what we would call Noachides. They're not serving God as completely as a Noachide has to serve God, but it's permissible. And it's interesting, the Bavitcher Rebbe explains on a very, very deep level this concept that the Jewish soul is sourced in a level of God, at which point there's nothing but God. And therefore, a Jew can't believe anything but God. But a non-Jew soul is sourced in a level of God where there could be also creation. And that's why for a non-Jew, there could be the possibility of believing in God and the intermediary. But one who's considered a righteous Gentile, a Noachide, one who has a portion in the world to come, as we've discussed in this class, of course, for all of our wonderful special attendees, I guess they're able to access something higher. I guess you're accessing something higher because on the higher level of being one of the righteous Gentiles, Hasidim Musa'olam, Noachides, there's no belief in anything but God. Any questions on this? This isn't so, simple, so to speak, and I tried to lay it all out as clearly as I could because I think it's very relevant, just in terms of not of yourself, but even understanding people around you. Any questions on any of that? Okay. So the next thing that I wanted to touch on that the Rebbe speaks of, I thought was very fascinating, was, we've mentioned this before in other contexts, that on one hand, there are 7 Noahide laws, which of course have many, many sub-laws and hundreds of pages of laws, but also how there's even within the 7 laws, there's like space for more, which I know for a lot of Noachides, there's a sense of I want more, especially because it might feel like a lot of the Noachide laws are things to don't do. Once I've mastered all the don'ts, I want to do and I want to serve God and I want to serve more, but where exactly does God want me to serve him more? What's God's vision of more for a Noachide? So I think that's a very, very relevant question, which is I wanted to bring this up because I know Noahides a lot of times want to do more. What does God want you to do that's more? So the Rebbe actually discusses this, and he says that anything that has to do with the overarching vision of a Noachide would be applicable for a Noachide the same way it is for a Jew, which means anything that has to do with, you might call it like human relationships or human feelings or making this world a good place, a moral place, a godly place. Any, what we might call Jewish law that you don't think of as under the Noahide laws, but is part of that human relationships would be, the Rebbe says, very appropriate. It's not mandatory, but very appropriate for every Noachide to follow. We discussed last week something that would definitely fall into this category that we're looking at from a slightly different slant, which was the idea of honoring one's parents. So we said, and I've said this before, that something that's not literally found as one of the 7 laws, but something Noachides, I'm saying going back to ancient times, took on themselves was honoring parents. And we see here, this exactly fits the Rebbe's explanation, that honoring parents makes sense as the way of making our world a good world, a godly world, a humane world. So even though you say, well, literally, I don't have to honor my parents, I don't like my parents, I have a bad relationship with my parents, I'm a Noachide, a Jew has to honor their parents, I don't have to. But we said, actually, no, Noachides do have to honor their parents. Because that was something Noachides as a whole took upon themselves thousands of years ago as something how God would want humans to behave. So that honoring parents is something actually that's mandatory because it was taken on voluntarily, but taken on by Noachides in a way that it became sort of obligatory on Noachides. This goes all the way back to ancient roots of us understanding that Noachides as a group took on honoring their parents. But there are other laws that they weren't officially taken on by the mass world of Noachides, so it's optional, but the Rebbe says it's a very good idea because this is how God wired us. If God is telling us as humans, this is how you should act, then this is how all Noachides should act. So the example the Rebbe gives, interestingly enough, is the laws of mourning. So there are many, I thought this was fascinating that the Rebbe was saying that this is something that, again, it's not obligatory on a Noachide. But if a Noachide was saying, I want to live as God-oriented a life as possible, I want to do my maximum ability as a Noachide, where do I add? The way the Rebbe defines it, because I thought it was a very fascinating thing, yes, any concept in Torah that has to do with having the world being a civilized place, a settled place, as we're saying, a moral place, a godly place. So that would be an excellent example. So is a Noachide obligated in the laws of mourning? No. Is this a good idea for a Noachide? Yes. Does it bring him closer to God? Yes. Does he have to do it? No. So what do we mean by the laws of mourning? So the Rebbe says, there's a laws of mourning, which, delineated in all Jewish law, that there's a concept of 7 days of mourning. In those 7 days, you stop all work and you just focus on the mourning. There's a certain, the most intense period is till the burial. Then the 7 days start from the day of burial. In Jewish law, you bury the body as soon as possible. There's no concept of waiting for any reason, like for someone to come in, or it's you want to wait on a Sunday, you want better weather. No, our vision is that it's not respectful for the body to be waiting around to be buried. So you bury as soon as possible, and from the day of burial starts the clock ticking of 7 days of mourning. The first 3 days are the most intense days. And then there's 4 other days where all those days you're in mourning, and there's many laws around mourning. And then after the 7 days are over, that official time when all you're focusing on the mourning is over, but there's still mourning laws, of which a certain intensity lasts till 30 days. And then there's another level of much less intensity, but still lasting until 11 months. And those are laws of mourning. So why does the Rebbe say laws of mourning would be applicable for a Noachide? Because the Rebbe says this isn't, I just want to compare, because I thought this was so relevant, because I know so many Noachides are searching to do more I thought it was so amazing, this very strong clarity of the Rebbe's vision that you can do more, but understand what God wants more from you. So God would say, Shabbos, that's not per se where I need you to do more. Kosher, I don't need you to keep kosher. But anything that has to do interpersonal, has to do as a human, as the best way for a human, not spiritual esoteric concepts that we don't understand, but practical concepts that we understand why a human is wired that way. So like Maimonides explains, that if a person doesn't follow these laws of mourning, it's not healthy for them because they're not giving proper time to really focus on grieving. At the same time, Maimonides says, if you grieve too intently, it's also not good. And it's also sort of like not trusting God. If a person gets stuck in grief, then it's like they're not believing that God has a plan and that this is good for the person. And that this is ultimately going to be something that's also positive for the person that passed away. So if you mourn too much, it's sort of like a denial of God. If you don't give yourself time to mourn properly, you didn't really like do it right, and therefore it's not healthy for you. So God is saying, I made you, I created you. I know as humans, the best thing for you is to take 7 days off life, literally for 7 days. Once a person's mourning, they can't do anything else but mourn. I want you to take 7 days off life and completely focus on mourning. And then after that, I want you to move on and have some restrictions of mourning that remind you of the stature and make you know that you are giving honor to the person that passed away. And then after the month, I want you to have less restrictions, but still some. For 11 months, still have some. I'm sorry, some of the restrictions last for 12 months. Still have some, because you want to feel that you're giving true respect to the person that passed away. And then, you know, you could live completely fully your life knowing that you did the right thing. So it's an amazing example the Rebbe is giving here of like, that's where a Noachide can do more. Because is a Noachide obligated to take a week off his life and just mourn? No. And honestly, many Jews that are not religious, even though they might know the tradition, but they're not going to take a whole week off. You got to go to work, you got to this, you got to that. But God's saying, I made you. I know this is the best way for you to be. As a human, the best thing is to really mourn for a short period of time and move on in an appropriate way. So the Rebbe says this is exactly an example of where Noachide could do more, where Noachide could do it the same way. He doesn't have to, but he could do it the same way and really living as God wants people to live. That's not per se wants a Jew to live. Oh, yeah, God would want all people to live. God's not obligating all people to do that, but that would be a way Noachide could do more. So is the concept clear? Because I thought to me this was such an amazing concept, because I do know this is a striving of so many Noachides. And that's why I thought it was really, really special to see so clearly how the Rebbe discusses the issue and his response to it. Any questions or thoughts on any of this?
I just wanted to say that that's one of the good examples. Something I really appreciate about Judaism is I see all the laws within Judaism as healthy discipline. And it's just an example by following that, it's for your own good, the health of you, because so many people don't know how to handle mourning, especially appropriately. And so, you know, it gets drug on for long periods of time, or, you know, it's just hard to know how to deal with it. So a lot of people avoid it, keep themselves busy, and then, you know, end up having their own personal issues with it because they didn't know how to deal with it properly. And I appreciate
I think you're
that
so right, Corey. I think, and I go back to the same thing, because God created us. So he knows exactly what's best for us as people. Like you said, exactly right. And so many people have no clue and therefore excessively mourn, don't focus on it, and sort of like think they don't need to, but then it keeps coming back to them because they feel they didn't do the right thing and wasn't respectful or honorable, wasn't appropriate, a lot of guilt or excessive mourning. So yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I thought it was just very beautiful how the Rebbe is writing. So this should be for all mankind. There's no reason why all mankind can't benefit from No, all mankind shouldn't benefit from this, from these systems, because these systems are really. That's great.
Hi, Carol. Hi, buddy. Hi.
I bet Gershom's sleeping.
Yes, he is. Yeah.
Yeah. So too would Beryl be, except there was no time. I normally make sure to put him to bed before class.
Yeah.
But we went straight
Yeah.
from party to class. There was no
Sure.
time. I see your
Yep.
beautiful Mashiach picture in the background, Danielle.
Oh, this?
Oh, no,
This
it's
is
not. I thought it was a
actually.
Mashiach. I saw the end. No, that's beautiful.
Oh,
That's,
no.
is that,
Ketubah.
is that the ketubah?
Yes, yes.
Wow. Let's look at
Yeah.
that for a second. That is Danielle's ketubah. How beautiful. Wow. 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 Beautiful.
Your husband signed it.
Yes, yes. Now I think he created the
Yes.
language.
Yes, he
Yes.
did. Yes.
Yes. Yes. Yes. I remember him researching, trying to understand what would be exactly the right
Yes.
wording of a ketubah.
Yes.
Yes,
Mhm.
that's very beautiful. Very, very beautiful. Very special.
Thank you.
And you look at it and you know, hey, we're built on something very strong.
Yes. Yes.
You get upset.
Yes.
No, no, no. We're built on something very strong.
Yes.
Very beautiful. Very beautiful. So that was. So it was also very interesting. There also brings out here a very beautiful idea in terms of the mourning itself. I thought was so special that if a person excessively mourns, again, so as Corey said, if you don't have God's framework on how to mourn, like I don't think I don't know. I don't think too many people in our modern world say, take off a week plus, because till the burial plus a week, and only focus on the mourning, and then move on, but you have these restrictions, and then after a month move on, but you have these restrictions, and then after the year you just move on and know you did it completely right. And then there's such peace in knowing this is God's way and this is the best way. But if a person gets stuck in this excessive mourning, it's really a sense, it really leads to like, it really expresses a lack of faith in God. Because excessive mourning means I feel so bad for the deceased having passed away. And we believe that God is good and everything God does is good. So even for the person that passed away, this has to be part of good. And of course, the good is that there is the afterlife and reward for everyone that served God properly, which means, of course, in our context here, for every Noachide who truly believes in God and truly served God. And then, as we've said, there's a special afterlife for Noachides. So following the laws of mourning and giving it the attention, but then not pulling yourself down with grief, and knowing that once you do what you were supposed to do, this person's soul is at peace and this person's soul is going to be in a good space, is really affirming belief in God as good and in the afterlife. Of course, sort of the disclaimer for that would be in this situation, really making sure those people that are close to you also accept God and serve God, so you can feel that confidence that they also are having that afterlife for all Noachides. Because everyone who's a Noachide does have a piece of eternity and an afterlife based on, of course, all the ways they serve God in this world. So it's this very specific example of mourning. On one hand, as an example, and I'm sure we can think of other examples of like, well, if I wanted to do more, where should I put my energy? Where should I put my efforts? Obviously, as we've discussed within laws of modesty, there's more, because that's something, obviously, again, as Corey said, doing it God's way is the best way. God made us. God knows what's best for us. Now, is a Noachide required to have all the laws of modesty just like a Jew? No. We said no. But good is only better. Like the more there are is obviously laws of modesty for a Noachide. And then one could go more, which would only be more worthy, more righteous, more better, and more accepting that God, I trust you that you made me, and you know what you want from me. You know how best I live a healthy, good life as one who serves you, as a godly person creating a godly world. So it really, to me, was opening up vistas of thought on like how a Noachide who wants to do more, not only in prohibitions, but also in practical, proactive things like we discussed last week, the idea of charity. Now, again, of course, the basic opinion is that charity is an obligation on all Noachides, and it would fall into the subcategory of courts of law, and justice will be an obligation of charity. But again, within charity, and there's charity, and then there's giving free loans to people, and there's kindness, and the kindnesses include, participating in helping, people get buried, or like that would be a great example. Just think of this idea of like that proactive Noahide who's supposed to, share the message with the world will be this concept of a human should be buried. A human shouldn't be burnt. God gave you your body. It shouldn't be cremated. It should be buried. It should go back to the earth. But that's, again, an example. Well, where does it say that you have to do it that way? But here's an example of like, well, anything that God said as a human, this is right. This is right for all humans. And therefore be something that all humans should follow. Any other questions or thoughts on this? Okay, so hopefully it'll open up your thoughts to maybe other ideas that might be relevant. Something else I thought was very interesting, that I spoke about in terms of Noachides, is the idea of offering a sacrifice. So in the times of the temple, there was a temple in Jerusalem. There were two. There was a temple that lasted 410 years. Then it was destroyed for a period of 70 years. And then there was a second temple that lasted 420 years. And it was destroyed some 1900 years ago. And we are waiting with firm belief for the complete revelation of the redemption of Mashiach, when we will have the third permanent temple that will not be destroyed. So once there was that first temple in Jerusalem, a Jew was not allowed to offer a sacrifice except in the temple. Until that time, there were periods when Jews were allowed to offer sacrifices outside. They had what's called a tabernacle, like a much smaller version of the temple, a more transportable version of the temple, what they used in the desert when they were traveling for 40 years, and what they set up in 3 different locations in Israel for hundreds of years. So at certain points, because that tabernacle was sort of fixed, like it was in one place for 369 years, so at that point you could only offer sacrifices in that tabernacle. But sometimes it was more shifting around, and then there were periods when the Jews were allowed to offer sacrifices outside the tabernacle. But once the first temple was built, the first one of the two, it was forbidden for any Jew to offer any sacrifice outside the temple. Even if the temple is destroyed, like it was for a period of 70 years between the first and the second, or from the second until now, some 1900 years, it's forbidden for any Jew to offer a sacrifice outside the tabernacle, the temple. But a non-Jew is allowed to. It's a very interesting concept. Again, I don't think it's so practical that you're going to build a altar out in your backyard and go to the animal market to buy an unblemished calf or sheep or goat to try to slaughter it for God. But it's very interesting that God's saying, but you could if you wanted to. I'm open. I'm accepting, which was really, I felt like a very beautiful concept here, how God is saying, almost making it like, well, the Jews have to follow these laws and therefore they're restricted, because once I build a temple, that's permanent, so I can't let you offer it anywhere else. But for the non-Jews of the world, if you want to offer me some sacrifices, hey, I'm open. Which I thought was very, very, very sweet. That God would be saying to all the non-Jews of the world. Again, nowadays it's not so relevant because we don't do that. But in those days, in ancient times, when, of course, it was the most normal thing that if you wanted a closeness to God, you took an animal and slaughtered it and burnt it for him. that God was saying to the non-Jew, you can still do it. Now, the word sacrifice in Hebrew is karban, and the root word of karban is a word close, karov, close. So the whole act of the sacrifice is an act of coming closer to God. So it's like God is saying to the Noahides, listen, I made some specific ruling, so my the Jews are stuck. They can't do it. But you don't have those rules. You can still offer the sacrifice. You still have that ability to get close to me. I still open it. It was also very interesting because Maimonides, when he discusses the laws of the sacrifice, many laws about sacrifice, and he writes all the laws, at the very end, like the last concept he discusses is how a Noachide, how a non-Jew could offer a sacrifice even not outside the temple. And he writes how the Jews should instruct him how to do so, which was an amazing thing because the concept is that the most important thing you write at the end. There's a concept in Torah study, everything follows the conclusion. So the concluding thought is the most important thought. So when a sage is writing, if it's in the Talmudic discussion or in the works of law, Maimonides, they're going to structure that the most important concept they're writing at the end. So what did Maimonides choose from all of the laws of sacrifices to write at the end? That a non-Jew has the ability to do so, to offer the animal sacrifice, even when the Jews cannot. And Jews have the obligation to teach him how. As if Maimonides is saying this most important thing. Now, why would Maimonides say this? Of all the laws of sacrifices, this seems like such a PS to the law, because this is sort of saying, well, Jews aren't allowed, but the non-Jew could, and Jews teach the non-Jew how to do this. Like, why would he view that as the most important thing? But if you understand that a sacrifice means the idea of coming close to God, karban, karov, to be close to God. So what Maimonides is saying is non-Jews have a special way of coming close to God in ways that even in certain situations that Jews can't. Like there's all this food Jews can't eat, but a non-Jew can. And then if the non-Jew eats the food and uses the food to serve God, they're elevating all these pieces of the world to God that a Jew can't, but they can. So a non-Jew has a special ability to come close to God. And that's an important ability. And Maimonides' final thought is, and the laws of sacrifices, which is the idea of karov, of coming close to God. Hey, Jews, I want you to understand, it's really important to help, to teach the whole world around you how they too can come close to God. Teach them the laws, teach them how to do it, teach them how they can become closer and closer to God. And this is so important that this is the final thought Maimonides writes in the entire section on the laws of sacrifices, on coming close to God. Because this is the most important thing a Jew should know, is that there's a whole world out there that he can help also come close to God. So I thought this was a beautiful piece, how the Rebbe explained these ideas for us to really value yourselves, value the class, and know how much God values you. Know how much God values every effort. So we had the idea of, we started off with the idea of that on one hand, a non-Jew could believe in an intermediary in belief and speech, but not in action, not in service. And we said, but a Noachide shouldn't, because they should be closer to God than that. And then we spoke about the concept that every Noachide could do so much more because they could do all that God commands Jews in terms of what would be humanistic, interpersonal actions, things that have to do with making the world a good place, a settled place, a godly place on a human level. And now this idea where we're really saying this concept of the sacrifice of coming close to God is so important for all the Noachides to come close to God, that it's literally the last thought that Maimonides writes in all of the laws of sacrifices, which are alluding to coming close to God. So I thought that was really beautiful and really, really, really special in terms of how much everything you're doing is so valued by God and how important you are to God, and to really keep walking that road closer and closer and closer. Any thoughts on any of that? Anything anybody wanted to share?
Wow, that's amazing. That's the first time I heard that a non-Jew could do sacrifices to come close to God.
Well, that already goes back to the times of the temple, that non-Jews will come and offer sacrifices to God in the temple. In the times of the temple,
Right.
non-Jews would come and offer sacrifices, and that was always permissible. And what Maimonides is saying is a non-Jew, so to speak, has the ability a Jew doesn't have, because a non-Jew could offer a sacrifice when a Jew can't. Because a Jew can only offer a sacrifice in the temple, the non-Jew could offer the sacrifice even outside the temple. And then the Rebbe is looking at this allegorically as like how important to God is the closeness a non-Jew has to him, which is why it's written at the very end of these laws to say, like, it's the conclusion, it's the highest note, so to speak. It's the concluding note of this whole concept is Jews help non-Jews get close to God. Because the idea of offering the sacrifice is really korban, to come close, how much God wants the whole world, all the non-Jews, to come close to him, and how important it is.
That's amazing. Very interesting. I guess goes back to in the end times that all nations will bring sacrifices. It says.
Absolutely. 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 100%. You can all bring sacrifices to God, and God welcomes the sacrifices, even to the degree that he's saying you could do it outside the temple. Because the idea of offering the sacrifice and coming close to God through the sacrifice, God wants. God wants people to come close to him.
Now, in the end, will the non-Jews go to the temple with their sacrifices also?
You're saying, would they be allowed to stand on the temple ground?
Yes.
Would they bring that? They could definitely offer the sacrifices. Where they'd be allowed to stand, I don't know, because there was lots of boundaries in the temple. This is where this type of Jew could stand. This is where the woman could stand. This is where Israelite Jews could stand. This is where Levite Jews could stand. This is where the priest could stand. This is where the priest doing the service could stand. There were many, many laws. So I don't know where, if those laws will be the same by the complete revelation of Mashiach or not. It seems it'll be different, because the Rebbe speaks many, many, many times. The Lubavitcher Rebbe speaks how when Mashiach comes, all the Jews will go dancing into the Holy of Holies, which of course we know in the times of the temple, only the high priest, one day a year on Yom Kippur, could enter the Holy of Holies. And the Rebbe discusses how all the Jews, men, women, and children, on any time they want, can enter the Holy of Holies, which means the laws will be different in terms of where you can stand and when you can stand. So we'll see.
Wow, interesting. Now, Mashiach is Mashiach for the whole world, correct?
Absolutely.
Hello, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Is there any exemption that, say, someone is giving charity? Is that person supposed to, to tell some people that, she or he's doing it? Anyway, the reason is so that, those people learn how to give also.
That's a great question, Jenny. So there's two thoughts in giving charity. It's a very good practical question. So Jenny's question is, when one gives charity, because we mentioned the idea that Noachides are definitely supposed to give charity. It's viewed, charity and honoring parents are two examples of things that are mandatory on Noachide, not optional, they're mandatory. And they follow under this seventh law of courts of justice, which includes charity, which includes honoring one's parents, as versus what the Rebbe was saying about laws of mourning. The Noachide doesn't have to keep the laws of mourning, but could. So are you supposed to let other people know you give charity? So there's two thoughts on that. One thought is there's a very great advantage to giving charity secretly, privately, that nobody knows about it. And that's considered a very big virtue. On the other hand, exactly as you said, there's a thought that it's appropriate for people to know you give charity because it will inspire them to give charity. So a person, and that's a very big virtue because you want to inspire other people to give charity. So a person has to really weigh it. Like if you know that if your siblings knew you gave charity, this would inspire them that, hey, I give charity, you earn more money than me, or you have more resources than me, or it's so doable, you could also do it. It's such a great virtue. It's such a wonderful thing to do. It makes you feel so great. You're helping mankind. Then it'd be good to do it. If on the other hand, if you share this with your siblings and they would just think you're so weird and strange, or be upset with you for squandering your money and what's going to happen, and then later you're not going to have, you'll probably come to us and ask for handouts because you're giving away your money now and you shouldn't do that, you should put it into your retirement savings, then it wouldn't be good to tell them because they're not open to being inspired by it. And then it's just talking about something, and you shouldn't talk about it. It should be private. So you sort of have to, it's a very good question, and you really have to think the environment I'm in, would the people be receptive and take it on because they say, oh, it's practical, it's doable. Hey, she doesn't earn so much more money than me and she's giving charity, and oh, that's so nice, that's so beautiful, and she's helping all these people, and I'd like to do something meaningful in my life, so I'd like to do that too. Or would the people just like look at it in a very, very negative way because they're in general not open, or they're looking with a bad eye at things, and then you're not going to gain that they're going to be inspired. So better keep it private so you have the advantage of you kept it private. Meaning in general, sorry for my long-winded answer, but it's a complicated question. In general, it's best to share it because it's always important for us to try to help others come close to God. And obviously charity is something God very, very, very much wants of his world and very much wants from every human in his world. So it's good unless you know that in this environment, it's just going to be rejected, and then don't share it and have the advantage that it's private. So the sharing it would overwhelm the advantage of privacy, except in a situation where you know they're not going to receive it anyway.
Yeah. I think it's good in some way. Like, when I did it, they all respond and they did the same. So yeah, that's a good thing. And they said, yeah, thank you for, inspiring us. And yeah, I'm doing it not to boast to people, but I'm doing it because I want them to know that, we have to share the love that we have, the love that, God gave us. We have to really share it, to those people who really needs it, those victims. And yeah, I have another question.
Sure.
It's, I'm not very close to my parents, and but I'm giving them, support, financial support. That is it honoring your parents? Is that way considering honoring your parents, even you're not very close, but you're doing something for them, is it considering?
Is giving financial support an expression of honoring your parents? Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
That
Yeah,
is,
thank
and
you.
obviously for each one of us, we should always try to do whatever we can to express honor. And if it's hard for you to talk to your parents, maybe you could write them a letter, send them a card. If they have WhatsApp, send cute pictures of your son. Grandparents always generally like to see pictures of grandchildren. So sometimes if the personal relationship is not so good and it's hard to say call them once a week because they're not going to want to talk to me, it's going to become a negative conversation. You could sometimes sort of get into your psyche like, okay, so once a week I'm going to send them pictures of my child or me and my child with just like a little note on it, thinking of you, hope you're having a wonderful day, it's cold here, enjoy the warmth by you, like little lines, but just it's your way of saying, I love you and you're important to me and I'm trying to reach out. And if you do that consistently, when they're in the space of wanting it, they know you care also. So sometimes that's like a good way of trying to create or bridge the relationship.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? Any other thoughts? Okay. Well, thank you so much. Again, my apologies for being so late, but his birthday is only once a year. I don't know when the next birthday is of someone in my family. I think in the past it's happened before. But be well. Have a wonderful week, and just know how many opportunities you have to serve God and how God so much appreciates them. Be well. Have a great week.
Shabbat tov. Thank you.
You too. Thank you.
So.
Bye.